Welcome to the Twinkle Talks EYFS podcast. Working in the early years is busy, funny, messy, and exhausting. Join me, Shana, some of the Twinkle EYFS team, special guest speakers, and other early years practitioners as we talk honestly about our experiences. Whether you're listening for CPD, on your commute, or to help you relax, Twinkle EYFS will share everything you need to know about all things early years. Hello and welcome to another episode of Twinkle Talks EYFS. I'm your host Shana here with another episode in our mini-series all about communication and language. This is episode 2 and we are going to be talking about pre-birth and babies and what kind of development goes on in those stages. I'm particularly excited about this episode because I do not have any experience working with pregnant mothers or newborn babies up to 12 months. It's a complete new world to me. So this one is going to be particularly exciting for me. We've got the lovely Julia and Louise back again to tell us all about it. So let's go take a listen. Hello, lovely ladies. We're back again for a lovely episode together. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very good. Thank you. I'm excited about this episode. This is probably the one that I've been most looking forward to. What about you guys?
Yeah, this is exciting.
We love this subject. It's a good subject to talk about.
I think what makes it exciting for me is because I worked in like the older early years, like the nursery reception, like 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds. I've never worked with babies before, but obviously it's really important to know, where the children have come from. So I've never really learnt about babies' communication and language. So this is going to be super exciting for me.
Yeah, it's really exciting and I think so important for all of us working in the early years. I think we talk about the older end of the early years a lot more sometimes because of their role in schools, but it's so important to understand babies' developmental stages. It's really nice to get that kind of appreciation. And if children are struggling later on, it will come back to this development too.
That's a very good point. And of course, we've got listeners that work in childminding services and preschools and private nurseries and all sorts of different settings that will have babies. So it's good for them too, right?
Of course. Babies are so important and so much learning is happening.
Yeah, I was quite baffled about this, and I can see why there's an episode entirely for babies and also like pre-birth and things, because a lot happens. So when we're talking about babies in this episode, we're going from 0 months to 12 months, and then the next episode we'll be looking at the progress of toddlers and then 3 to 4 and 4 to 5. But yeah, before we do that, we've already done an episode, haven't we? Episode 1 on communication and language. Let's do a quick recap in case anybody is jumping in now. We're talking about communication and language, big topic, right?
Yes. So last time we talked about communication and language, and we talked generally about some of the different terms that you might hear. We sort of emphasised that communication and language involves many different aspects, whether it's listening and attention. And we talked about the fact that listening is an active process of hearing and understanding. And we talked about the fact that hearing focuses on the ability to recognise sounds, to understand them and be able to interpret them. And then the attention sort of side of listening and attention is to focus on something specific for a period of time. So obviously, as you go from a baby to a 5-year-old, that looks very, very different because the attention span is obviously developing as the child does. So obviously there's listening and attention involved in communication and language. There's also the development of the way sounds are produced, speech sounds are produced. A lot of that is about coordinating the muscles in the mouth and the throat to be able to express your thoughts, your feelings, and be able to communicate with other people. And then there's the language side, and this can be split into 2 different elements. The first one is receptive language, which is the understanding element of language. So it's the ability to understand spoken language and be able to respond to it appropriately. So that might be listening to words, sentences, questions, statements that are said to you, then obviously being able to internalize that and understand what it's said to be able to respond. So that's the sort of the understanding element. And then the other part of language is the expressive language, which is the talking element. When you use the words, or it's not always about words, it's gestures and phrases. Sometimes it's facial expressions as well, come into play with that very early stages. But it's the talking element, it's the part at which a child would be able to express themselves.
Lovely. Yeah. So it's a big topic, loads of different things putting in together. And then not only that, it happens or it presents itself, language communication presents itself in very different ways depending on the developmental stage of the children. And as we all know, early years is a massive learning and development period for a child. 80 to 90% of a person's brain is formed in those first 5 years of life. So you can imagine what might be going on as they grow. But I heard a little rumor, this is what gets me excited, is that this process about developing communication language is already happening before they're born, right?
Yeah.
It's really incredible. And that's what you might have heard if you know anyone that's been pregnant before, that they sometimes talk to their belly and they'll get their partner to talk to their belly as well. And they'll play songs that maybe they recognize when they're born later. And that's because they say that while in the womb at around 24 to 30 weeks, babies can begin to hear sounds, feel vibrations, and start to recognize people's voices, which is amazing. And although sounds will be muffled, they're able to hear those rhythms and melodies and kind of the ups and downs of vocal tones. When they're born, they can already recognize the voices of those that are close to them because they've been hearing them a lot, just through slightly muffled sounds as they're inside the womb.
That is so cool.
And then when they're born, they're able to respond to them. It's amazing, isn't it? And have you seen, there's a lot of things, obviously, on social media. And for example, I know that a lot of people play certain songs that they listen to, fun, upbeat songs. And then when their baby's crying, they put on that same song that they played them when they're in the womb and they calm down. It's lovely, those sorts of things, because they can hear them.
I really hope that's true, because can you imagine, like, if you didn't know that and like your favorite songs was like techno or like hardcore rock, and you just, look,
Baby's
it might be your
rocking
thing.
out.
You might want your thing. Yeah, little baby in there is having the best time, but then when you want to get to sleep at night and they ain't sleeping, you gotta then put the bassy techno on. Like,
well, it's your own fault, I'm afraid.
Good to know.
There's a lot to be said about that sort of sound, though, isn't it? Because babies, when they're born, they quite often like the white noise type sounds, because it's the muffled sounds that they would have heard in the womb. So yeah, maybe techno would be okay.
I just love the idea of a little baby inside a womb going ooch, 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 ooch. Like, it's great fun. Speaking of the noises, though, I know I've heard about white noise being really good to soothe babies. For me and stuff, I use the noises, as they call them, like during therapy and stuff, and for my own well-being. And look, you're not allowed to make any jokes about this because it's me, but brown noise is my favorite. Have you heard of brown noise?
I get a bit confused between the difference between white and brown noise. I have heard of it, but I don't really know the difference,
I've
to be
not
honest.
heard of that.
No, there's loads of different colour noises. So you've got green noise, blue noise, violet noise, white noise, pink noise. Yeah, so they say pink noise is to do with replicating the sound of the womb and like blood flowing and things like that. Because one of my friends, when she was pregnant, she uses pink noise for her newborn, and that worked. I personally detest white noise. Like, it grates. I can't. But brown noise,
which is
it's not what you think, right? I'm just not listening to people fart all day.
Long pause. We're filling in the blanks. We're like, yes.
It's to do with the frequency levels. So the color represents a different frequency. So I think brown noise is the bassiest, the deepest level of sound frequency, and it gets higher with the colors. So like blue noise and violet noise are really high pitched and they literally make me feel sick. I can't listen to them. But if I'm having a bad day or I can't sleep or I really need to sort of like, it's like a massage for my brain, I use brown noise. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's really cool that they use that for babies as well then, because clearly there is something to do, like you say, Lou, with the
Yeah.
different vibrations and stuff. And yeah, it's cool.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, a little tidbit for you.
I did not know. I'd not heard of any different colour noise, so that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Honestly, go on streaming sites, go on YouTube, and go on like music sites, go on Spotify, and you'll find loads of playlists. Or if there are some apps as well, like mindful apps. So I've got a subscription to
Yes.
Headspace, and you can get all of the different noises there. And honestly, go listen to brown noise. If there's one thing you take away from any of these podcasts over the 3 years that I've been doing this, go and
This is
listen to
it.
brown noise. This is it. And if
All right,
you're
noted.
Wow.
and if you're teaching and you're looking after babies and they're just, they need some chill time, stick some brown noise in your settings, see what happens, let me know.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Anyway,
Fascinating.
sorry, back to babies. So all of that stuff is going on in the womb, and which is extremely exciting. So they've already got the organs necessary for processing and developing communication and language and things like that. And it continues to develop, obviously, as they come out of the womb. It's not fully formed yet. We keep growing and growing. So we're going to talk about specifically between 0 months and 12 months in this episode, the different aspects of communication and language that we will be looking at, obviously. With all of this in mind, just seeing how much they're doing pre-birth anyway, this is probably a very obvious question, but just in case we don't know, why is communication and language so important for babies?
I mean, that's a really huge question. There's just so much. Why is it important? So it gives them the ability to express themselves and how they might be feeling and what they might need at different times. It enables them to make strong attachments with key caregivers or adults that may be in a setting that they're in. This is quite a big one, actually. It strengthens the neural pathways in the brain. And I think we talked about that a little bit last time, about every time you've had an experience communicating with someone, then you're making connections in your brain and they're getting stronger and they're remembering those over time and learning how to respond to different things. So that's quite a big one, I think. And that's all part of learning, is making the connections between different things. Developing social skills, and obviously as they grow and change, it's developing friendships. But really, it's everything. It develops the firm foundations for every other aspect of learning to build upon. So yeah, communication and language is pretty fundamental in a baby's journey.
I think if you get anything from our podcast on communication and language, it's like, it's so important. We cannot stress this enough. But we do want to say that, I mean, especially with babies, they all develop at such different rates. So although we're going to talk about what might be happening from 0 to 6 months and 6 months to 12 months, these are not hard and fast rules, and absolutely every child will be different. So it's just important to kind of take them as the unique developmental kind of stages that they will have.
Yeah. I mean, we get a lot of stuff on social media, which is lovely because we've got like community groups, like Twinkle reception practitioners or Twinkle nursery practitioners, and they'll do a lot of questions, and we'll get customers asking, a lot about, oh, my child's doing this or my child is not doing this. Is that okay? And we're so in this position of, we want to give you a definitive answer, but we cannot. Like I think that's probably one of the trickiest things about working in early years, as well as one of the best things, I think, is that there is no blueprint. It's, yes, we can give you some typical quote unquote stages of development, but that is not how humans function, and that is not how the brain develops, not how babies develop, children, toddlers. It's, look, they'll learn some things at some time in their life. Go.
Which is really helpful when you're training. You're like, thank you for that. When you're training, you're like, I just want a really clear sheet that tells me exactly what should be happening. You're like, I'm really sorry, but that's just not what we can give you.
No.
But we can talk about what might be happening.
Exactly. We can give pointers. And there's a lot of things as well that I think you learn on the job. which is quite nice. It's like the children teaching about development, because the brain is such a big thing, right? And like we've always said, communication and language is a big topic. We're never going to know it all.
Yeah.
And there are still some things that we need to learn, but hopefully this will make some of your day-to-day job more interesting, as well as obviously helpful for you and the children, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
definitely.
Lovely. Right. There are obviously different aspects to communication and language. It's not just about speech. It's not just about this or that. So we'll take it piece by piece. And I would love for you guys to teach us about what attention and listening looks like in a baby that's either 0 to 6 months or, 6 to 12 months. What does attention and listening look like?
Okay, well, one of the first things I think with attention and listening to bear in mind is when a baby is born, their hearing, although it is developed and they've heard lots in the womb, it will almost still be a little bit muffled at birth because they have fluids still in their ears that they gradually over time it clears. So their hearing will gradually improve because the fluid will start to drain from their ears. So that's just the first thing I think to bear in mind, that sounds will still be a little bit muffled for babies once they are born. But from between birth and 6 months, babies will start to turn towards familiar sounds. That could be a voice or a sound that they recognise, but they might also be quite startled by unfamiliar and loud noises. And I think that's, again, going back to they've not developed their pitch yet. So if a sudden loud sound, I can visualize exactly what a baby would do if they get startled. They jolt, don't they? Quite.
Yeah.
And their hands sort of splay and they're like, oh. So they can get very startled by loud noises or unfamiliar noises that they've not heard before. They can start to distinguish in that age between language sounds and other noises. And they do, in terms of attention, they start to seek eye contact and they're fascinated by faces. So they start to gaze at familiar caregiver's face when they talk to them. So they're starting to tune in to the fact that somebody's talking to them and they want to be part of that. And then they become more aware of other sounds that are in the environment. That might be toys or the doorbell, maybe. And then they start attending to songs and music. And I think from birth, babies are quite engaged with songs and music because maybe they've heard them or they've had their caregivers singing to them whilst they've been in the womb. So again, it can be quite a familiar sound to them that they tune into quite early on. And then as they go further down their journey in their first year, we're thinking now that they're a bit older, they're between 6 and 12 months old, they'll start to turn their head or their body now towards a familiar noise, almost like they're seeking it out if they hear it. Or they might be able to hear a voice from across a room, so they're actually starting to hear from further distances. They might point and use vocal sounds to get eye contact or to gain a caregiver's attention. So they're starting to really want to engage and tune in with others that are around them. They'll be able to listen more carefully to sounds and tune in more. And then they'll start to maintain eye contact for longer durations, definitely starting to look more in the direction of someone that is speaking. And then lastly, sort of thinking about by the time they get to 12 months, they're playing with sounds, they're creating sounds. They might like to bang and clap. They might be starting to clap to make sounds. So they're really starting to become playful. If you're doing lots of singing and actions, they might start to join in with some of the simple repetitive actions or sounds within a song. So yeah, they can get quite excited about that. So it's a really playful time.
Yeah, on the playful thing, it reminded me of something as you were saying it. One of my favourite things is when you if you go shopping or something and you see like a family or caregivers with a baby and they're in this big, giant, echoey supermarket space and they realise that their voice can go a lot further than they do at home. And you just see these poor parents and carers going, oh my goodness, child, please, you're embarrassing me. And the baby's just like, woo, 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 woo. And they're playing with sound, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I would like to just point out that sometimes doesn't stop when you're a baby. Well, it doesn't stop when you're a baby.
Yeah.
And if I go to a garden centre with my dad and there's those big terracotta, he'll stick his head into the pot and go, ooh, down into the He's maybe not a baby anymore, but he's very, very playful.
Yeah.
So,
I
yes.
love that. I love that.
Don't let that stage stop just because you're not a baby.
Yeah.
That's right.
I must say, if I'm ever in a cave-like location, I'm always like, echo. I must have to say echo. Echo.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, there's quite a lot going on in the tension and listening part. So then this is probably the next one's probably a bit harder because it's more typical of older children. But in terms of like using their speech sounds or talking or verbalizing, like what does that look like for babies?
I think it's tricky, like you say, with talking, because obviously babies aren't there yet, but they're making lots of other noises to communicate with us. So they're using different types of cries, for example, just to express their needs, if they're tired or if they're hungry. And obviously, those kind of close caregivers can already start to tune in at such a young age and know, oh, yeah, my baby's hungry, my baby's tired, just from making those noises. And they'll start to be making cooing, gurgling, or babbling sounds to themselves or to you in response, which is very sweet because they want to interact. They'll squeal or laugh when they're happy or excited. This is one of my favourite sounds. I don't know about you, Lou, but I love a baby squeal. And they're so
It's a
excited.
great sound.
It's such a good sound. And they'll start to respond, like we were saying, with the cooing, the gurgling and babbling when someone talks to them. So they might respond with just moving their hands or their facial expression or try to make noises, which is very sweet because they want to interact. They're excited to interact. So they might also make those noises to get someone's attention. And they'll also be learning to kind of imitate sounds of others, and that imitation as they hear and then repeat those vocal sounds. They'll be learning about how to move their lips and their tongues and exploring things like blowing raspberries, which is always good fun when you're at that age. And they'll be, throughout that time, learning to control the air that comes from their lungs to produce those vocal sounds. So there's a lot of learning that's happening, even if they're not at that full talking stage. They're still making lots of noises and gestures.
They'll be doing a lot of imitation at this time. So they'll be copying the sounds that caregivers might be producing, even starting to change their intonation as they're communicating as well and imitating those sounds. So yeah, it's a playful time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that makes us more playful. I mean, that's why people say sometimes you can hear when someone's talking to a baby when someone isn't.
Definitely.
Because we start to make a lot more noises as well, almost imitating them back. It's quite funny.
Yeah, it's very exciting, isn't it, when you hear a baby responding and copying, and it's an exciting time.
Yes. And their little face changes when they're like, oh, you made the same sound as me.
Yeah.
Even when it's like a squall of excitement. I made that the other day to one of my nieces, and she looked at me like, oh, you made a similar sound. I was like, yeah. It's very sweet. And then from kind of 6 to 12 months old, babies may copy an adult's speech and lip movements or vocal sounds during play. And then they might start to create babble strings or a combination of sounds like ba, ma, da as they progress. And kind of as their coordination and their lips strengthen, and they're able to use their tongue and jaw movements to produce those longer vocalizations. And then they might repeat sounds over and over because they're excited to have made those. So those small babble strings or combinations or ones they're imitating, they might repeat them because they're still learning what they sound like and they're coming out almost of themselves. And then they'll begin to take turns in back and forth babble conversations by listening and copying repeating sounds generated by adults, which is always really nice. And they may start to say single words around 12 months, such as dada, which is, I think, one of the funny things that parents often talk about, because people say, oh, why do they say dada first? But it's because it's one of the easiest sounds to make, dada, rather than others. But I think it can always be an interesting conversation between parents. We say, oh, the first one is dada. Like, it's not a preference. It's just that some words are easier to say.
Last time when we were recording the last podcast, we talked about the dance of communication, and I think that's definitely what you've just talked about, is that back and forth way to sort of have those
Yeah.
conversations with a baby. It starts from when they're very, very young, just playing with language and playing with sounds and the different noises you can produce, and there's nothing better than that sort of that back and forth.
Interaction.
Yeah, and exchanges.
Yeah.
It's quite an exciting time, and you can see quite over a period of time how that can develop quite quickly, actually.
Exactly. Yeah, and some people, I think, maybe those outside of the early years aren't aware of how important those interactions are. It's like, well, they're not talking yet, you know? So, I mean, it's not the same as us having a conversation. You're like, no, no, no. It really is, because they're learning, to look at each other and to wait, and they're listening while you're talking. Because I think some adults can feel uncomfortable talking when a child is not ready to talk back, but that's so important because that's really a huge part of the process, that they're learning how to interact.
Yeah, and using face expressions at the same
Yes,
time.
facial expressions, exactly.
They were beautiful. So again, a lot of things going on in that stage. It's just you can't really take any of those stages for granted, really, can you? It's like, no. Just because they're not typically talking like adults or children who are older do, doesn't mean they're not processing and expressing
Oh, they're
communication.
processing every single moment. They're
Yeah,
watching.
they're watching, always watching.
Always
Yeah.
watching.
Great. Okay, so then that kind of brings me quite nicely on to, yes, they're watching, they're observing, they're mimicking, they're taking all of this in. How much of it do they understand? Like, what does understanding communication and language look like for babies?
From birth, babies are developing their understanding of the sounds initially that they hear and learning how to respond to them. So, between the ages of birth to 6 months, they will be able to recognize familiar people's voices just from the different sounds that they create. So, it will, for example, if they're recognizing their familiar caregivers' voices, it will help them to feel calm when they hear those voices, and it will comfort them. So sometimes you can hear, a baby that might be distressed, maybe crying, and a caregiver goes to pick them up and speaks to them, and automatically you can almost sense that the heart rate of the baby or the breathing is changing because they're actually hearing the sounds of their caregivers, and it's just starting to reassure them, and they feel comforted. So yeah, understanding just goes from sounds of voices initially. They'll be starting to copy the facial expressions that they see, and they will start to wait and watch before they respond. So it a bit going back to what you were saying about imitation and copying, they'll be sort of understanding what somebody has done to them, and then they'll be maybe mirroring it back. And that also goes alongside like smiling and laughing when others do. It's a bit of a sort of a call and response. If somebody smiles at them, then they'll smile back. So they're starting to sort of understand that conversation that you can have just through facial expressions. They will respond to the different tones that their caregivers might use. So, for example, if a caregiver or an adult or somebody that's close to them says something loud, then it might be too surprising for them, so they might cry. Or if they hear a funny sound, for example, blowing raspberries or sound that you might do, or you might giggle, then they'll respond in that sort of that happy way as well. So they're starting to understand almost like the very starts of emotions and responding to that a little bit. And they'll start to show some excitement at sounds nearby. So, for example, if they hear a familiar toy or a sound that they've had a positive experience with before, but again, we're going back to those connections that they're making all the time to build up their neural pathways in their brain, they might show that they're excited through their body language. That sounds nearby, and they're sort of almost anticipating that they're going to have another positive experience.
I really like that sound as well, like the little baby squeal of excitement, like when you play peekaboo or something and they know it's coming and they just can't contain it, and then they just do that really cute little squeak. That's my favourite.
Yeah, and I mean, peekaboo is a great one, isn't it, as an example? But I think you have to be quite mindful of peekaboo as well, because they do get very excited, but then if you say the boo too loudly,
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they can get
It's a
scared.
bit, you can see their whole face just go whoosh, and change. So you need to play peekaboo gradually, I think.
Got ya.
Not too surprising.
Be mindful.
Got ya. Mindful peekaboo is on the menu. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
Moves.
Great.
moving really from the sounds and understanding sounds when they start to develop a little bit further, then from around the age of 6 months old, babies start to begin to understand spoken words and be able to communicate with them using gestures or sounds themselves. So, for example, they might start to understand words and phrases used in familiar context. So, if they're experiences that they've had repeated, so for example, more for drink or food or all gone, they might start to understand what that means. Bye bye or up. But all of those they have had to experience with an action or with a gesture to support them and support their understanding. They may begin to understand really simple questions and they might start to turn or nod their head as a way of sort of almost replying. And they will probably start to recognize and respond to their name being called. And they'll do that by turning their head or looking at the speaker in recognition of their name being called. So it's quite a big leap, actually, isn't it? From,
It
0 to
is.
6 to 6 to 12
I was
months.
going to say from mindful peekaboo to this.
So much learning
Quite.
happens from 0 to 12.
Yeah,
It's mad.
super cool though. I think this is super fun.
There's more. So if you'd like a few extra things, then we can
Go for
we
it.
can say a few extra things. So other things they might be doing in between 6 to 12 months is they might respond to familiar named objects, so starting to understand single words for people or objects. So mama, milk, car, daddy. So they'll start to recognize them and turn or respond to them in some way. They might start to smile more at people who are smiling at them, although we have already mentioned that. I think they'll be understanding that call and response probably more, and they'll copy more facial expressions and gestures. So they might start waving at people and pointing more to communicate. So yeah, lots going on between 6 and 12 months.
Very exciting.
Well, yes, I think so.
I think we're pretty
Me too.
biased. But yeah, loads of stuff going on. Okay, so with that in mind, though, yes, it is a lot of stuff going on, and I'm just thinking about perhaps new parents. Even there might be parents that are listening to this and thinking, "Oh, we've got some earlier specialists here talking about communication and language. What's my child going to develop like, when I have a baby?" For a complete newbie, right? This is a lot to take in. This is a lot of things to process, like as adults, like how our babies in our care are developing, even just in these 12 months. As we know, the role of the adult and the role of the environment play a massive part in any educator's life. So I'm just trying to think practically about our parents who are listening, our private early years, day nursery educators, our childminders, like the role of the environment. What can that do for this sort of development for children?
I mean, it's huge for babies. There's so many things to think about. And I think one topic that I'm sure comes to mind as well is the use of sensory resources and play, because babies are in a huge stage of development with their senses. So it's really nice to kind of have lots of different resources that will help them to explore smells and sights and textures. And so just think about what you have either in your home or in your setting that can kind of help explore babies' senses and provide new experiences for them. So, for example, messy play is, I know, something that perhaps doesn't happen as much at home because it's so messy and it can be a bit tricky. But there's so many lovely things you can do with messy play, and it's such a great activity for babies. I know that Lou is a bit of an expert in this, particularly.
Yeah, I mean, I think messy play has a massive amount of language opportunities linked to it, because you can play and engage and start to use so many different words. I mean, I think with the thing I would say to be mindful of with language is to not use too much language at the point of playing and exploring. It's a fine line, isn't it, between wanting to model language, but actually not overloading the language so that it becomes overpowering, really. But yes, messy play and experience and engaging all those senses is hugely valuable at this stage.
I was going to add to that. I know we're probably moving on to like educators, like the role of educators, but that whole thing about overuse of language, like we have to remember as role models, we're not just role modeling language, we are role modeling communication. So we also have to role model listening. We also have to role model focus and attention and like, you know?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
easier said than done, especially with listening, because I think we all think that we're great listeners, but I think when you pay attention to how active listening works and how much you're really not just waiting for someone to stop talking so that you can start talking, you're really listening to what they're saying and taking in their facial expressions, their body language, if they're giving you eye contact, just like we were talking about all the things that babies do. Adults do that too, and that is part of communication. And it's important that we remember, even when we're very busy, to try our best to listen fully and actively listen, which is, again, easier said than done, I know, especially when you're stressed or you've got a lot going on, but it's so important.
Yeah, I think we talked about it last time in the podcast about cozy and homely spaces for developing quieter moments and allowing time for processing. So I think, making sure that you've got those quieter times and quieter areas in your environment where you can listen to stories or share books together or explore loose parts quietly. So I think quieter areas are really important in the environment, because we talked about it last time again about how there is so much noise in our world now, and that actually taking time to really have quiet moments for us all is really important. And I think with babies in particular, they're going to find it a lot harder to tune in and to listen if there's constant noise and loud noise around them. So that's where cozy spaces, quieter areas, and even taking them outdoors as well, because the sound is very different in the outdoor environment. So, going into nature and having that space is really, really valuable. And also it helps them to tune in to the here and the now, which offers many opportunities for talk and looking at leaves swaying in the breeze. And yeah, there's so many communication moments that you can have in the natural environment. And not forgetting songs and
Oh, yeah.
stories, which are really important, and having a really good range of story resources in your environment. So having textured storybooks, babies can touch and feel, and again, it's going back to that sensory interaction and sensory stimulation, but also, having some stories which have sounds in them or resources that create sounds, because again, that's linking to their hearing and their listening and attention and tuning them in. So having a range of story based resources is a must have in an environment.
Thank you very much. That was beautiful. Makes a lot of sense to me. And then, last but certainly not least, of course, the role of the adult. We have touched on it a little bit because it does kind of interweave with the environment, doesn't it? But what more outside of that can we as educators and carers do?
Yeah, so we've talked quite a bit about imitation and back and forth exchanges. But I think one of the really valuable things to be mindful of is providing many opportunities for that eye contact and that face-to-face interaction. So getting down to their level, taking time and pausing. Don't always rush in to fill the space. Allow the baby to take the lead and respond, whether you're showing excitement in how they're responding or talking to you. Being really mindful of eye contact and face-to-face interaction time. Narrating what you're doing together, so that babies start to make that link between specific language and actions and responding to how they might be feeling. Slowly trying to name objects, but not overwhelm. We did talk about not overwhelming with language. So, for example, if a baby is showing interest in a teddy, for example, you might be playing alongside them with that and you go, that's a teddy. Or you might even start with teddy. So you're just reducing the amount of language that you're using. And then you might say, that's a teddy. Or you might say, it's a big teddy. So starting to build up the language, not rushing in with, oh, do you like the teddy? It's a very big teddy. Teddy's red. Teddy looks happy. So really starting to gently introduce babies to a range of language over time. And then repeating experiences. We talk about repetition is so important. And I think for language and communication, that repetition of experiences, we talked a bit today about developing the neural pathways and the connections to things that babies have experienced, and they need repetition to be able to do that, to make those links. So repeating words many times over a period of time will help them to acquire that language into their vocabulary later on down the line. But they need to be able to hear it quite a few times before they actually would start to use the language themselves. And then the last but not the least is the playful experiences. Just everything at this stage. Well, at any stage, actually, play is so vital, isn't it, for all learning?
Yeah.
But blowing raspberries, making silly sounds, singing and being playful. Yeah, just having energy with what you're providing and what you're doing together is really, really important.
Yeah, having fun.
No, look at that. That's a nice little roundup, I think, of what happens in the development of babies. I think there's a lot going on, and I think you've given some really nice, helpful tips on what to look out for and how we can support them. So thank you very much, ladies. This isn't the end. I hope you didn't think you were going to get out of... It's funny that when you think about it, how many games are based on playing with skills that we grew up with, like a lot of communication and language games. A lot of fine motor games, like Operation, that's fine motor, and we still do things. So another communication and language game I found, if you haven't tried it, you really need to try it. It's called Poetry for Neanderthals.
Well, this sounds
the
fun.
idea is, it's so funny, honestly. I played it at a Christmas game around a friend's, and there's this like little blow up sort of caveman stick thing, like Captain Caveman had that wooden thing that he was bashing people over the head with. You get an inflatable one. You are part of a team, or you've got like a partner, and one person knows a word and has to get the other person, their partner, to guess the word. But it's a little bit like Articulate, where you're not allowed to use that word, you have to use others. But the catch is you're only allowed to describe this word using one syllable.
Wow.
So you can only use really short words, which is kind of why it sounds like you're a caveman or a Neanderthal. And yeah, it's a lot harder than you think, but boy, is it funny. I can't even tell you the amount of times. And the person who's holding the other person, so they're obviously on the opposite team with this, they're like getting ready, because if you don't use one syllable, if you use more, they bop you on their head. And
I love the sound of it.
It's
so funny.
so funny. Honestly, it's one of the best Christmas games. So we're gonna play it. Julia, did you want to go first? And I believe you have a word for me. Yeah. Oh, and also, of course, it could be any word in the world. So I've narrowed it down to early years words. It might be early years objects in the setting or the classroom. It might be early years topics. It might be, stuff like that, just to give us a little bit of help. You haven't got a bopper thing, so you're going to have to shout bop, Lou. If you spot Julia saying more than one syllable, you're going to have to shout bop.
Okay, I'll try.
Right, sorry, Julia. Go.
Eat. Yum.
Banana. Orange. Snack. You're not allowed to use gesture. She's laughing.
I think I know what it is.
Oh no, stop it. This is my word. Is snack the right way?
Yeah.
Okay. Do I need to give you more?
Yes.
Okay. Snack table.
I can't think of any word with one syllable to express this. Clock? Is that one syllable?
Clock, you say? Snack clock. Is it snack time?
Yeah.
Woo! Okay.
It's like, it's clock? I was like, clock's a long word. Is that only one syllable?
Okay. That was a good one. I've got a word now for Lou. So Lou, I'm going to describe something to you. You got to guess. Julia, keep me in check. You shout bop at me if I'm not doing one syllable words.
I'll try, but I'm not sure I'm very good.
Oh, this is going to be so hard. Okay. White. Craft. Put. Things. Put things on with this. Put things on with this.
Glue?
In crafts. More. Put things on with this in crafts.
I don't think you have the S in crafts, can you?
It's a one syllable
Craft.
word. One syllable, sis. Lou.
Yes.
Got this.
Put things.
Wake up, Lou.
Come back to
things
us.
on. Put things on things in crafts.
Glue.
More.
Stick.
Yay!
Yay, me! That was good.
Thanks. That was hard.
Shauna, like you were dying.
I'm impressed. You nearly got a whole sentence out
I
there.
was like, whoa.
Yeah, thanks.
Compared to me being like,
Oh, that's extra bonus points.
I'll start
seem
with
like it.
words and see if they, and then I'll put them together. I was like, oh my gosh, I can make a one syllable sentence.
Julia. Okay, here we go. Sky,
Mhm.
fall, rain, wet,
Ooh.
splash,
Outdoor play?
wet floor.
Outdoors?
Yay! Wet floor.
I like that.
Very good.
I love how Lou, you were giving us a journey, like
Yeah.
sky, cloud, wet fall. Like you was like this, and it rained. Oh, that's so good. Well, there you are. That was Poetry for Neanderthals, EYFS version. What did you think?
I enjoyed that. Well,
Yeah,
I
that
really
was
enjoyed
fun.
it, but we missed the bop.
Look, with
we
that
were
good,
yeah.
Too good.
we were that good. We didn't need to keep ourselves in check because we were good with one syllables. So
We were very good.
But it's more satisfying to bop.
Yeah. I felt like I could offer more to that game today.
I feel like I offered very little, so I'm glad I went first, then it got better instead of ending on a low with mine.
Last week I really struggled.
But again, it's really interesting how we all took three different approaches. I feel like all three of us did different things. Julia, you focused on just like different words of description. I tried somehow to make sentences with one syllables, and Lou, you tried to make a story.
It's on a journey.
Yeah, like it started off in the sky.
Quite
And,
incredible.
like it's really cool.
All about the journey, Shana. All about the journey.
Speaking of journeys, this one, for today anyway, has come to an end. Thank God.
Aw.
My brain is fried. I can't imagine these poor babies. No wonder they sleep a lot. Do you know what I'm saying? If this is what they're having to
They're
process
learning a
every
lot.
day.
A lot of processing time. They need a lot of
Yeah,
sleep.
They need that sleep.
So do we. Yeah, you know what? We'll go for a nap too, shall we? Nice and fresh in a couple of
Yeah,
weeks.
nice nap.
So we can talk about language and communication development in toddlers, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds. What do you say?
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
All right. Lovely to see you, ladies. Catch you later.
Thanks,
Bye.
Shana.
Thanks, Shana.
Bye.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to the lovely Julia and Louise for joining us. Another one where my mind was just racing, lots of questions. It was a really exciting episode to record, actually. I feel like I've learned so much already, and hopefully you have too. If also you work with babies and you have some more expertise to share, we would love to hear from you. Please get in touch. The next episode is going to be episode 3, where we're going to talk about toddlers from age 1 and up, all the way up to age 5, and what the progression looks like there. So another exciting one. I can't wait for it. I hope you have a lovely day wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
So that's it for today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you would like to join in or would like to know more, then come and find us on our social media sites. We have a Facebook page, Facebook groups, an Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube. All the links of where to find us will be in our podcast description. Come and join the conversation. And whatever you're doing today, I hope you have a great day.